The Horse Lord by Lisa Tuttle. The double barn doors were secured by a length of stout, rust-encrusted chain, fastened with an old padlock. Marilyn hefted the lock with one hand and tugged at the chain, which did not give. She looked up at the splintering gray wood of the doors and wondered how the children had gotten in. Dusting red powder from her hands, Marilyn strolled around the side of the old barn. Dead leaves and dying grasses crunched beneath her sneakered feet. She hunched her shoulders against the chill and the wind. "There's plenty of room for horses," Kelly had said the night before at dinner. "There's a perfect barn. You can't say it would be impractical to keep a horse here." Kelly was Derek's daughter, 11 years old and mad for horses. This barn had been used as a stable, Marilyn thought, and could be again. Why not get Kelly a horse? Why not one for herself as well? As a girl, Marilyn had ridden in Central Park. She stared down the length of the barn. For some reason, the door to each stall had been tightly boarded shut. Marilyn realized she was shivering then. She finished her circuit of the barn at a trot and jogged all the way back to the house. The house was large and solid, built of gray stone, 170 years before. It seemed a mistake, a misplaced object in this cold, empty land. Who would choose to settle here? Who would try to eke out a living from the ungiving, stony soil? The old house and the eerily empty countryside formed a setting very much like the one Marilyn, who wrote suspense novels, had once created for a story. She liked the reality much less from her heroine than her heroine had liked the fiction. The big kitchen was warm and felt comforting after the outside air. Marilyn leaned against the sink to catch her breath and let herself relax. But she felt tense. The house seemed unnaturally quiet with all the children away at school. Marilyn smiled wryly at herself. A week before, the children had been driving her crazy with their constant noise and demands. Now that they were safely away at school for 6 hours, she felt uncomfortable. From one extreme to another, thought Marilyn, the story of my life. Only a year ago, she and Derek, still newly married, were making comfortable plans to have a child, perhaps two, someday. Then Joan, Derek's ex-wife, decided she'd had her fill of mothering, and almost before Marilyn had time to think about it, she found herself with a half-grown daughter. And following quickly on that event, while Marilyn and Kelly were still wary of each other, Derek's widowed sister had died, leaving her 4 children in Derek's care. 5 children. Perhaps they wouldn't have seemed like such a herd if they had come in typical fashion, one at a time, with a proper interval between. It was the children, too, who had made living in New York City seem impossible. The house had been in Derek's family since it was built, but no one had lived in it for years. It had been used from time to time as a vacation house, but the land had nothing to recommend it to vacationers, no lakes or mountains, and the weather was unusually unpleasant. It was inhospitable country, a neglected corner of New York State. It should have been a perfect place for writing, their friends all said so. An old house, well soaked in history, set in a brooding, rocky landscape beneath an unlittered sky, far from the distractions and noise of the city. But Derek could write anywhere. He carried his own atmosphere with him, part of his ingrained discipline. And Marilyn needed the bars, restaurants, museums, shops, and libraries of a large city to fill in the hours when words could not be commanded. The silence was suddenly too much to bear. Derek wasn't typing. He might be wanting conversation. Marilyn walked down the long, dark hallway, thinking to herself that this house needed more light fixtures, as well as pictures on the walls and rugs on the cold wooden floors. Derek was sitting behind the big Parsons table that was his desk, cleaning out his 67 pipes. The worn but richly patterned rug on the floor, the glow of lamplight and the books which lined the walls, made this room, the library and Derek's office, seem warmer and more comfortable than the rest of the house. "Talk?" said Marilyn, standing with her hands on the doorknob. "Sure, come on in. I was just stuck on how to get the chief slave into bed with the mistress of the plantation without making her yet another cliched nymphomaniac." "Have him comfort her in time of need," Marilyn said. She closed the door on the dark hallway. "He just happens to be on hand when she gets a letter informing her of her dear brother's death. In grief, and as an affirmation of life, she and the slave tumble into bed together." "Pretty good," Derek said. "You got a problem I can help you with?" Not a literary one, she said, crossing the room to his side. Derek put an arm around her. I was just wondering if we shouldn't get a horse for Kelly. I was out to look at the barn. It's all boarded and locked up. I'm sure we could get in and fix it up. I don't think it would cost that much to keep a horse or two. Or two, he echoed. He cocked his head and gave her a sly look. You sure you want to start using a barn with a rather grim history? What do you mean? Didn't I ever tell you the story of how my great-uncle, guess he must have been, my great-uncle Martin, how he died? Marilyn shook her head, her expression suspicious. It's a pretty gruesome story. Derek, it's true, I promise you. Well, remember my first slave novel? How could I forget? Paid for our honeymoon. Remember the part where the evil boss man who tortures his slaves and horses alike is finally killed by a crazed stallion? Marilyn grimaced. Yeah, a bit much, I thought. Horses aren't carnivorous. I got the idea for that scene from my great-uncle Martin's death. His horses, and he kept a whole stable, went crazy, apparently. I don't know if they actually ate him. He was pretty chewed up when someone found his body. Derek shifted in his chair. Martin wasn't known to be a cruel man. He didn't abuse his horses. He loved them. He didn't love Indians, though. The story was that the stables were built on ground sacred to the Indians, who put a curse on Martin, or his horses, in retaliation. Marilyn shook her head. Some story. When did all this happen? Around 1880. And the barn has been boarded up ever since? I guess so. I remember the few times Anna and I came out here as kids. We could never find a way to get inside. We made up stories about the ghosts of the mad horses still being inside the barn. But because they were ghosts, they couldn't be held by normal walls, and they roamed around at night. I can remember nights when we'd huddled together, certain we heard their ghosts neighing. His eyes looked far away. Remembering how much he had loved his sister, Marilyn felt guilty about her reluctance to take in Anna's children. After all, they're all Derek had left of his sister. So, this place is haunted, she said, trying to joke. Her voice came out uneasy, however. Not the house, said Derek quickly. Old Uncle Martin died in the barn. What about your ancestors who lived here before that? Didn't the Indian curse touch them? Well, Derek, she said warningly. Okay, straight dope. The first family, the first bunch of Hoskins who settled here, were done in by the Indians. The parents and the two bond servants were slaughtered. The children were stolen. The house was burned to the ground. That wasn't this house, obviously. But it stands on the same ground. Not exactly. The house stood on the other side of the barn, though I doubt the present barn stood then. Anne and I used to play around the foundations. I found a knife there once. She found a little tin box which held ashes and a pewter ring. But you never found any ghosts. Derek looked up at her. Do ghosts hang around once their house is burned? Maybe. No, we never did. Those Hoskins were far too back in time to bother with, maybe. We never saw any Indian ghosts either. Did you ever see the ghost horses? See them? He looked thoughtful. I don't remember. We might have. Funny what you could forget about childhood, no matter how important it seems to you as a child. We become different people when we grow up, Marilyn said. Derek gazed into space a moment, then aroused himself to gesture at the wall of books behind him. If you're interested in the family history, the little set in dark green leather was written by one of my uncles, published by a vanity press. He traces the Hoskins back to Shakespeare's time, if I recall. The longest I ever spent out here until now was one rainy summer when I was about 12. Seemed like forever. I read most of the books in the house, including those. I'd like to read them. Go ahead. He watched across the room and wheeled the library ladder into position. Why are you thinking of writing a novel about my family? No, I'm just curious to discover what perversity made your ancestor decide to build a house here, of all God-forsaken places on the continent. Marilyn thought of Jane Eyre as she settled into the window seat, the heavy green curtains falling back into place to shield her from the room. She glanced out at the chilly gray land and picked up the first volume. James Hoskins won a parcel of land in upstate New York in a card game. Marilyn imagined his disappointment when he set eyes on his prize, but he was a stubborn man and frequently unlucky at cards. This land might not be much, but it was his own. He brought his family and household goods to a roughly built wooden house. A more permanent house, larger and built of native rock, would be built time. But James Hoskins would never see it built. In a letter to relatives in Philadelphia, Hoskins related, "The land I have won is of great value, is to a poor wandering remnant of Indians. 2 braves came to the house yesterday. My dear wife was nearly in tears at their tales of powerful magic and vengeful spirits inhabiting this land." "Go," they said, "for this is a great spirit, as old as the rocks, and your God cannot protect you. This land is not good for people of any race. A spirit, whose name may not be pronounced, set his mark upon this land when the earth was still new. This land is cursed," and more of the same, on, till I lost patience with them and told them to be off before I made powerful magic with my old Betsy. Though my wife trembled, my little daughter proved fiercer than her ma, swearing she would chop up the old pagan spirit and have it for supper, which made me roar with laughter, the Indians to shake their heads as they hurried away. Marilyn wondered what had happened to that fierce little girl. Had the Indians stolen her, admiring her spirit? She read on about the deaths of the unbelieving Hoskinses. Not only had the Indians set fire to the hasty wooden house, they had first butchered the inhabitants. They were disemboweled and torn apart, ripped by knives in the most hungry, savage, inhuman manner, for all the sin of living on land sacred to a nameless spirit. Marilyn thought of the knife Derek said he'd found as a child. Something slapped the window. Marilyn's head jerked up, and she stared out the window. It had begun to rain, and a rising wind slung small fists of rain at the glass. She stared out at the landscape, shrouded now by the driving rain, wondered why this desolate, rocky land should be thought of as sacred. Her mind moved vaguely to thoughts of books on anthropology which might help. Perhaps works on Indians of the region which might tell her more. The library in Janeville wouldn't have much. She had been there. It wasn't much more than a small room full of historical novels and geology texts. But the librarian might be able to get books from other libraries around the state, perhaps one of the university libraries. She glanced at her watch, realizing that school had let out long before. The children might be waiting at the bus stop now in this terrible weather. She pushed aside the heavy green curtains. Derek! But the room was empty. He had already gone for the children, she thought with relief. He certainly did better at this job of being a parent than she did. Of course, Kelly was his child. He'd had years to adjust to fatherhood. She wondered if he would buy a horse for Kelly, and hoped that he wouldn't. Perhaps it was silly to be worried about ancient Indian curses, the fear that a long-ago event would be repeated. Marilyn didn't want horses in a barn where horses had once gone mad. There were no Indians here now, and no horses. Perhaps they would be safe. Marilyn glanced down at the books still piled beside her, thinking of looking up the section about horses. But she recoiled uneasily from the thought. Derek had already told her the story. She could check the facts later, when she was not alone in the house. She got up. She would go and busy herself in the kitchen, have hot chocolate and cinnamon toast waiting for the children. The scream still rang in her ears and vibrated through her body. Marilyn lay still, breathing shallowly, and stared at the ceiling. What had she been dreaming? It came again, muffled by distance, but as chilling as a blade of ice. It wasn't a dream. Someone, not so very far away, was screaming. Marilyn visualized the house on a map, trying to tell herself it had been nothing, the cry of some bird. No one could be out there, miles from everything, screaming. It didn't make sense. And Derek was still sleeping, undisturbed. She thought about waking him, then repressed the thought as unworthy and sat up. She'd better check on the children, just in case it was one of them crying out in a nightmare. She did not go to the window. There would be nothing to see, she told herself. Marilyn found Kelly out of bed, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared out the window. What's the matter? Kelly didn't shift her gaze. I heard a horse, she said softly. I heard it neighing. It woke me up. A horse? Must be wild. If I can catch it and tame it, can I keep it? Now she looked around, her eyes bright in the moonlight. I don't think... Please? Kelly, you were probably just dreaming. I heard it. It woke me up. I heard it again. I'm not imagining things, she said tightly. And it was probably a horse belonging to one of the farmers around here. I don't think it belongs to anyone. Marilyn was suddenly aware of how tired she was. Her body ached. She didn't want to argue with Kelly. Perhaps there had been a horse. A neigh could sound like a scream, she thought. Go back to bed, Kelly. You have to go to school in the morning. You can't do anything about the horse now. I'm going to look for it, though, Kelly said, getting back into bed. I'm going to find it. Later. As long as she was up, Marilyn thought as she stepped out into the hall, she should check on the other children to be sure they were all sleeping. To her surprise, they were all awake. They turned sleepy, bewildered eyes on her when she came in and murmured broken fragments of their dreams as she kissed them each in turn. Derek woke as she climbed in beside him. Where were you? He asked. He twitched. Christ, your feet are like ice. Kelly was awake. She thought she heard a horse neighing. I told you, Derek said with sleepy smugness. That's our ghost. That's our ghost horse. Back again. The sky was heavy with the threat of snow. The day was cold and too still. Marilyn stood up from her typewriter in disgust and went downstairs. The house was silent, except for the distant chatter of Derek's typewriter. Where are the kids? She asked from the doorway. Derek gave her a distracted look, his hand still poised over the keys. I think they all went to clean up the barn. But the barn is closed. It's locked. Marilyn sighed and left him. She felt weighted by the chores of supervision. If only the children would go to school every day where they would be safe and out of her jurisdiction. She thought of how easily they could be hurt or die, their small bodies broken. So many dangers, she thought, getting her coral-colored coat out of the front closet. How did people cope with the tremendous responsibility of other lives under their protection? It was an impossible task. The children had mobilized into a small but diligent army, marching in and out of the barn with their arms full of hay, boards, or tools. Marilyn looked for Kelly, who was standing just inside the big double doors and directing operations. The doors were chained shut, she said, confused. How did you... I cut it apart, Kelly said. There was a hacksaw in the tool room. She gave Marilyn a sidelong glance. Daddy said we could take any tools from there that we needed. Marilyn looked at her with uneasy respect, and glanced away to where the other children were working grimly with hands and hammers at the boards nailed across the stall doors. The darkness of the barn was relieved by a storm lantern hanging from a hook. Somebody really locked this place up good, Kelly said. Do you know why? Marilyn hesitated, then decided. I suppose it was boarded up so tightly because of the way one of your early relatives died here. Kelly's face tensed with interest. Died? How? Was he murdered? Not exactly. His horses killed him. They turned on him one night. Nobody ever knew why. Kelly's eyes were knowing. He must have been an awful man then, terribly cruel, because horses will put up with almost anything. He must have done something so... No, he wasn't supposed to have been a cruel man. Maybe not to people. Some people thought his death was due to an Indian curse. The land here was supposed to be sacred. They thought this was the spirit's way of taking revenge. Kelly laughed. That's some excuse. Look, I gotta get to work, okay? Marilyn dreamed she went out one night to saddle a horse. The barn was filled with them, all her horses, her pride and delight. She reached up to bridle one, a sorrel gelding, and suddenly felt, with disbelief that staved off the pain, powerful teeth bite down on her arm. She heard the bone crunch, saw the flesh tear, and then the blood. She looked up in horror into eyes which were reddened and strange. A sudden blow threw her forward. She landed face down in dust and straw. She could not breathe. Another horse, her gentle black mare, had kicked her in the back. She felt a wrenching, tearing pain in her leg. Finally she could move. She turned her head and saw the great yellow teeth, stained with her blood, of both her horses as they fed upon her, and the other horses, all around her, were kicking at their stalls. The wood splintered and gave, and they all came in to join in the feast. The children came clattering in at lunchtime, tracking snow and mud across the red brick floor. It had been snowing since morning. The children were oblivious to it. They did not, as Marilyn had expected, rush out shrieking to play in the snow, but went instead to the barn, as they did every weekend now. "It's almost ready," they said. Kelly slipped into her chair and powdered her soup with salt. Wait till you see what we found," she said breathlessly. "Animal, vegetable, or mineral?" Derek asked. "Animal and mineral." "Where did you find it?" Marilyn asked. The smallest child spilled soup in her lap and howled. When Marilyn got back to the table, everyone was talking about the discovery in the barn. Derek, curious, the children, mysterious. "But what is it?" Marilyn asked. "It's better to see it. Come with us after we eat." The children had worked hard. The shrouded winter light spilled into the empty space of the barn through all the open half-doors of the stalls. The rotting straw and grain was all gone. The dirt floor had been raked and swept clear of more than an inch of fine dust. A large design stood out clearly, white and clean against the hard earth. It was not a horse. After examining it more closely, Marilyn wondered how she could have thought it was a depiction of a wild-rearing stallion. Horses have hooves, not three-pronged talons. They don't have such a feline snake of a tail. The proportions of the body were wrong, too, once she looked more carefully. Derek crouched and ran his fingers along the outline of the beast. It had been done in chalk. It was much more than just a drawing. The lines must have been deeply scored in the earth in the narrow trough that had filled with some pounded white dust. "Chalk, I think," Derek said. "Wonder how deep it goes." He began scratching with a forefinger at the side of the thick white line. Kelly bent and caught his arm. "Don't ruin it." "I'm not, honey." He looked up at Marilyn, who was still standing apart, staring at the drawing. "Must be the Indian curse," she said. She tried to smile. She felt an unease which she knew could build into an open dread. "Do you suppose this is what the spirit who haunts this land is supposed to look like?" Derek asked. "What else?" "Odd that it should be a horse, then, instead of some animal indigenous to the area. The legend must have arisen after the white man." "But it's not a horse," Marilyn said. "Look at it." "It's not a horse exactly, no," he agreed, standing and dusting his hands. "But it's more a horse than anything else." "It's so fierce," Marilyn murmured. She looked away into Kelly's eager face. "Well, now that you've cleaned up the barn, what are you going to do?" "Now we're going to catch the horse." "What horse?" "The wild one. The one we hear at night." "Oh, that. Must be miles away by now. Someone else must have caught it." Kelly shook her head. "I heard it last night. It was practically outside my window. But when I looked, it was gone. I could see its hoof prints in the snow." "You're not going out again?" The children turned blank eyes on her, ready to become hostile or tearful if she were going to be difficult. "I mean," Marilyn said apologetically, "you've been out all morning running around. And it's still snowing. Why don't you just let your food digest for a while? Get out your coloring books or a game or something and play in here where it's warm." "We can't stop now," Kelly said. "We might catch the horse this afternoon." "And if you don't, do you intend to go out every day until you do?" "Of course," Kelly said. The other children nodded. Marilyn's shoulders slumped as she gave in. "Well, wrap up. Don't go too far from the house in case it starts snowing harder. And don't stay out too long or you'll get frostbite." The children were already moving away from her as she spoke. They live in another world, Marilyn thought, despairing. She wondered how long this would go on. The barn project had held within it a definite end. Marilyn could not believe the children would ever catch the horse they sought. She was not even certain there was a horse out in the snow to be caught, even though she had been awakened more than once by that shrill, distant screaming that might have been a horse neighing. Marilyn went to Derek's office and climbed again into the hidden window seat. The heavy curtains muffled the steady beat of Derek's typewriter. The falling snow muffled the country beyond the window. She picked up another of the small green volumes and began to read. Within a month of his arrival, Martin Hoskins was known in Janeville for two things. One, he intended to bring industry, wealth, and population to upstate New York, to swell the tiny hamlet into a city. Second, a man without wife or children, Hoskins' pride, passion, and delight was in his 6 beautiful horses. Martin had heard the legend that his land was cursed. As he wrote to a young woman in New York City, "The Indians were driven out of these parts long ago, and their curses with them, I'll wager." But what is an Indian curse? without an Indian knife or arrow to back it. It was true that the great Indian tribes had been dispersed or destroyed, but a few Indians remained, tattered and homeless in the white man's world. Martin Hoskins met one such young brave on the road to Janeville one morning. "I must warn you, sir," said the ragged but proud young savage. "The land upon which you dwell is inhabited by a powerful spirit." "I've heard that tale before," responded Hoskins, shortly but not unkindly, "and I don't believe in your heathen gods. I'm not afraid of them. This spirit is no god of ours either. My people have known of it and respected it for as many years as we have lived on this land. Think of this spirit not as a god, but as a force, something powerful in nature which cannot be reasoned with or fought, something like a storm." "And what do you propose I do?" "Leave that place. Do not try to live there. The spirit cannot follow you if you leave, but it cannot be driven out either. The spirit belongs to the land as much as the land belongs to it." Martin Hoskins laughed harshly. "You ask me to run from something I do not believe in. Well, I'll tell you this. I believe in storms, but I do not run from them. I'm strong. What can that spirit do to me?" The Indian shook his head sorrowfully. "I cannot say what it may do. I only know that you will offend it by dwelling where it dwells, and the more you offend it, the more certainly it will destroy you. Do not try to farm there, nor keep animals. The land knows only one master and will not take to another. There's only one law and one master on that land. You must serve it or leave." "I serve no master but myself and my God," Martin said. Marilyn closed the book, not wanting to read of Martin's inevitable and terrible end. He kept animals, she thought idly. What if he had been a farmer? How could the spirit of the land have destroyed him then? She looked out the window and saw with relief that the children were playing. They'd finally given up their hunts, she thought. Wondered what they were playing now. Were they playing Follow the Leader? Dancing like Indians? Or horses, she thought suddenly, watching their prancing feet and tossing heads. They were playing horses. Marilyn woke suddenly, listening. Her body strained forward, her heart pounding too loudly, her mouth dry. She heard it again, the wild, mad cry of a horse. She had heard it before in the night, but never so close, never so human-sounding. Marilyn got out of bed, shivering violently as her feet touched the cold, bare floor. The chilly air raised bumps on her naked arms. She went to the window, drew aside the curtains, and looked out. The night was still and clear as an engraving. The moon lacked only a sliver more for fullness, shone out of a cloudless, star-filled sky. A group of small figures danced upon the snowy ground, jerking and prancing and kicking up a spray of snow. Now and again one of them would let out a shrill cry, half a horse's neigh, half a human wail. Marilyn felt her hairs rise as she recognized the puppet-like dancers below, the children. She was tempted to let the curtains fall back and return to bed, to say nothing, to do nothing, to act as if nothing unusual had happened. But these were her children now. She wasn't allowed that sort of irresponsibility. The window groaned as she forced it open. At the faint sound, the children stopped their dance. Once they turned and looked up at Marilyn. The breath stopped in her throat. She stared down at their upturned faces. Everything was very still, as if that moment had been frozen within a block of ice. Marilyn could not speak. She could not think of what to say. She withdrew back into the room, letting the curtains fall back before the open window, and she ran to the bed. "Derek," she said, catching hold of him. "Derek, wake up." She could not stop her trembling. Her eyes moved behind their lids. "Derek," she said urgently. Now they opened, and, fogged with sleep, looked at her. "What is it, love?" He must have seen the fear in her face, for he pushed himself up on his elbows. "Did you have a bad dream?" "Not a dream, no. Derek, your Uncle Martin. He could have lived here if he hadn't been a master himself, if he hadn't kept horses. The horses turned on them because they had found another master." "What are you talking about?" "The spirit that lives in this land," she said. She was not trembling now. Perspiration beaded her forehead. "It uses the servants, or whatever you want to call them. Can't abide anyone else ruling here. You've been dreaming, sweetheart." He tried to pull her down beside him, but she shook him off. She could hear them on the stairs. "Is our door locked?" she suddenly demanded. Yes, I think so. Derek frowned. Did you hear something? I thought, children are a bit like animals, don't you think? These people treat them as if they were. Adults, I mean. I suppose children must... I do hear something. I better go. Derek, no. The doorknob rattled and there was a great pounding at the door. Who is that? Derek said loudly. The children, Marilyn whispered. The door splintered and gave way before Derek reached it. The children burst through. There were so many of them, Marilyn thought as she waited on the bed. All she could seem to see was their strong, square teeth.